Thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. So there are only two instances in American history in which a U.S. president has been impeached. When Andrew Johnson was impeached in 1868, that was the first time it had ever happened in U.S. history, and it actually took them a couple of tries. They first voted on an impeachment resolution against Johnson in 1867. That failed. They came back again the next year and tried to impeach him again in 1868. That one stuck. But when those articles of impeachment that passed in the House, when those articles were conveyed over to the Senate for President Johnson to face trial, they couldn't get a two-thirds vote in the Senate to convict him and remove him from office. And so the effort to remove President Andrew Johnson from office failed, even though he was impeached in the House. Basically the same dynamic at work in 1998, just before Christmas, 1998, when the House of Representatives voted for only the second time in U.S. history to impeach the sitting U.S. president, who then was Bill Clinton. And again, in that instance, the House voted to impeach the president, but then they had to convey the articles of impeachment over to the Senate. And once again, they could not persuade two-thirds of the Senate to vote to convict Bill Clinton and remove him from office. And so, again, that effort to remove him from office via the impeachment process, it failed, even though Clinton was impeached in the House. And those are our only two experiences in this country with a U.S. president being impeached. Both presidents, Johnson and Clinton, were convicted in the House. Neither was convicted in the Senate. Neither was removed from office. The one president who did leave office in the context of impeachment proceedings, of course, was Richard Nixon, but he left office of his own volition. He quit rather than face lose. So it is this kind of irony of our constitutional history that the one process the Constitution gives Congress to remove a president from office for high crimes and misdemeanors, that process has been used twice to impeach a president. Neither of those guys got removed from office, though. The one guy who did basically get removed from office because of the threat of that process, he technically was never impeached. So anybody who tells you there's a clear, bright line in American history about how these things go and how the Constitution dictates these things go, that's sort of a civic fantasy. The way it works in real life is much more like a civic thriller. It's got way more suspense to it. You can definitely count on a cliffhanger or two. When the process starts, I'm not sure anybody who's being honest can tell you how ultimately it's going to end. Today, when Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi announced in an address to the nation that the House of Representatives is opening impeachment proceedings against President Donald J. Trump, she did make U.S. history. This is just something that hasn't happened very many times in the course of our country. Because of that, I think we're kidding ourselves if we think there's some typical way this is supposed to go now. There isn't a typical impeachment process. There's no way to say how history suggests this will unfold or how this thing would typically be handled or what's a departure from, consistent previous precedent. There is constitutional guidance for what happens here, but there is very little historical precedent from which we can extrapolate. And on top of that, on top of the fact that days like this have only ever happened a few other times in the history of our country, there are also specific peculiarities about this time, about this instance, that are both really interesting as factual matters, but they make it all the more suspenseful and all the more unpredictable in terms of how this is going to work out in the end and how this is going to unfold just from here on out. I mean, let's just start with the thing that was announced today by Speaker Pelosi. What exactly is the House going to do now that she has proclaimed that this impeachment process has started? Despite earlier reports today that Speaker Pelosi might be considering forming a special committee in the House specifically for the purpose of drawing up impeachment articles against the president, at 5 o'clock Eastern today, when Speaker Pelosi made her announcement, she made clear that she isn't forming any special new impeachment committee. Instead, she name-checked the chairman of these 6 committees, which apparently will each have their own role to play in this impeachment process going forward. the Judiciary Committee, the Intelligence Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Oversight Committee, the Ways and Means Committee, the Financial Services Committee. We're going to get some expert help over the course of this hour, including speaking with one of these committee chairs to try to understand exactly what Pelosi has proclaimed here. But as best as we can tell right now, the plan, I think, is for each of these 6 committees to pursue their own inquiries into potentially impeachable offenses by President Trump. And then each of these committees is expected to present what they believe is their best case for articles of impeachment against President Trump on the subject matter that they've been investigating. So all these committees will all give their potential articles of impeachment to the Judiciary Committee, to Jerry Nadler, who's the chair of the Judiciary Committee. If warranted, Nadler and the Judiciary Committee will then sort of formally compile these articles of impeachment that they will ask the House to vote on. And then the House will proceed toward an impeachment vote. So that, we think, is the process. And in theory, that all makes sense, right? But how does that work in practice? I mean, what's the timing on that? And what's different now going forward from what's already been happening in these committees? I mean, what is Nancy Pelosi's specific expectation in terms of what those committees are going to do now? And I ask that because all of those 6 committees right now, they're all already pursuing various investigations of President Trump for a broad range of alleged bad behavior by him. A lot of different things which could conceivably be construed as impeachable high crimes and misdemeanors when it comes to this president. I mean, everything from whatever's going on with the president's tax audit. The audit of his taxes is being investigated by the Ways and Means Committee under Chairman Richie Neal. Chairman Neal says a whistleblower has come forward to suggest that there's been some sort of improper effort by someone inside the administration to interfere with the IRS's audit of the president's taxes. Ways and Means Committee is already looking at that. Over at the Financial Services Committee under Chair Maxine Waters, they are reportedly looking, among other things, at potential bank fraud and insurance fraud by this president, by his family, by his businesses. In the Oversight Committee under Congressman Cummings, they're investigating a whole bunch of different alleged behaviors by the president, any number of which could be impeachable, including whether he may have endangered national security by mishandling security clearance applications, including those for his children. In the Intelligence Committee, they are also investigating a number of different allegations against the president, including continuing questions about the president's involvement in the Russian election interference of 2016. At the Judiciary Committee under Chairman Nadler, they are already actively investigating the president's alleged efforts to obstruct the law enforcement and counterintelligence investigation into the Russia scandal. I mean, those things are all underway already in all of these 6 committees. They all implicate potentially impeachable behavior by the president, depending on what these ongoing investigations turn up. Well, now today that Speaker Pelosi has made this historic announcement that impeachment proceedings are beginning against this president. And she's made that announcement specifically in the context of and with reference to these new allegations about the president in Ukraine. The president basically admitting that he solicited foreign help for his reelection effort from the country of Ukraine. Well, are these 6 committees just supposed to look at matters related to the president's interactions with Ukraine? Or are these 6 committees supposed to forward to the Judiciary Committee evidence of any potentially impeachable conduct by the president that they have been investigating, including on the subject of all those other topics that I just mentioned, things that they're already looking at, right? If they're supposed to do that, like let's say the Oversight Committee turns up behavior by the president with regard to the security clearances for Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump that actually rises to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors in the view of that committee. If they turn that up, are they supposed to forward that to the Judiciary Committee too? For that also to be folded into these impeachment proceedings? I mean, as interesting as I find, say, for example, the Financial Services Committee investigating whether the president committed insurance fraud when he misstated his financial assets in order to get better deals in his insurance policies. I find that very interesting. But I don't have any reason to expect that that investigation is wrapping up imminently. So, as I said, we will try to get some clarity on this as to what changes in the investigating committees in Congress now that what they're doing is part of an investigation proceeding that has been proclaimed today by the Speaker of the House, and that was proclaimed with specific reference to the president going to Ukraine to try to get help from them for his reelection effort. What did become obvious over the course of today, I think, is that this story is moving very fast. I have written and torn up a lot of drafts of this show already today. But just today, it's been, well, this whole thing has been going fast. I mean, you look at it even in the biggest, widest possible lens, it's only been a week since it first came to light that the president and his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, made these overtures to Ukraine, seeking dirt on President Trump's potential Democratic opponent in the 2020 election. We have known about that literally for only a week. We only even knew that there was some sort of whistleblower complaint about something related to Trump for a few days longer than that. While support for starting impeachment proceedings against Trump has been at a sort of low simmer among House Democrats for quite some time, there was a sort of relatively steady increase in the number of House Democrats who supported impeachment proceedings against the president since the Mueller report was published a few months ago. In the last 48 hours, the number of House Democrats supporting impeachment proceedings has gone through the roof. Now, with Nancy Pelosi's endorsement and her announcement today, the number of House Democrats supporting impeachment proceedings against President Trump is starting to look like it won't. I mean, it may not necessarily end up being unanimous, but it may be close. It's already close to 200 at this point. 218 is a majority of the House, which is all you need to actually impeach someone. So this thing is developing fast. We clearly have an incomplete understanding as of tonight as to how the Democrats are going to proceed here and on what kind of a timetable. We're going to be speaking, as I mentioned, with one of the chairs of one of the 6 committees that has been named as key to this process coming up live in just a moment. We also, of course, have an incomplete understanding of the facts and the behavior by the president that has led very quickly to this moment. The Washington Post was first to report a week ago that an anonymous whistleblower from inside the intelligence community had come forward and filed a complaint with the Inspector General for the Intelligence Committee, the intelligence community. The Inspector General reviewed that complaint, found it to be both credible and urgent. That should have set in motion a process by which that complaint was forwarded to Congress. The administration, the Justice Department, and reportedly the White House apparently stepped in to stop the complaint from being conveyed to Congress. Since then, we've learned through open source reporting that the whistleblower's complaint not only had something to do with the president's behavior specifically, it had something to do with the president making some kind of troubling promise to a foreign leader. Since that story first broke, the president has confirmed that, in fact, he did raise the issue of wanting some sort of investigation into Joe Biden when he was in communication with the president of Ukraine. The president initially denied that, but then later confirmed that at basically the same time, he was also withholding U.S. military aid to Ukraine. So the White House and the administration have come up with a million different explanations for why that military aid was being withheld from Ukraine. They denied that it was being withheld at first, then they admitted, okay, yes, we were withholding that aid. They said it was being delayed by some sort of interagency process, whatever that means. Then they told some lawmakers that the aid was being withheld so the White House could try to gauge the effectiveness of the aid in Ukraine, a claim that reportedly struck some lawmakers as, quote, odd. The president and Vice President Mike Pence then both claimed that the aid was being withheld because they wanted to make sure that Ukraine wasn't too corrupt as a country, because you shouldn't send any money to a country that's corrupt. Within 24 hours, that explanation from the president changed to what appeared to be a total non sequitur from him, in which he said he was upset that Germany and France weren't also giving money to Ukraine alongside us. And if you think about it, that's kind of a weird thing to be worried about, right? 5 minutes ago, your big worry was that nobody should be giving money to Ukraine because they're corrupt. Now, you want to make sure that the French and the Germans are giving money to Ukraine too, alongside us, because we're giving them money? I mean, these shifting and nonsensical explanations for why Ukraine was denied that military aid that had been approved by the Pentagon, that had been appropriated by Congress, that presumably is fertile ground for Congress to investigate if they do want more information about whatever happened here and whatever it is that this whistleblower has laid out in his or her complaint that the administration is blocking from coming to Congress. But honestly, one of the strange things about this moment in history, this rare day in history in which impeachment proceedings have been announced, one of the weird things about the way it's happening now and the way it has broken open over these last few days is that Congress might not actually need to do an investigation here. I mean, they might not really need to figure out much more about whatever's gone wrong here, simply because the admitted facts, the facts that are not in dispute anymore, are the basis for what you'd impeach him on, right? I mean, it's sort of an indisputed and admitted fact now that President Trump asked a foreign country to help him in his reelection bid by giving him dirt on Joe Biden. And the president personally intervened to withhold military aid from that country at the same time that he was making that request about Biden. In so doing, the president, according to the laws of common sense, created the impression in that foreign country that they wouldn't get that life-saving military aid from our country unless they coughed up the help that Trump wanted for his campaign. I mean, even if you know nothing else about this, you know that. That's what's known. That's what's the starting point. That's what they're conceding to. Now, investigating all the circumstances around that would certainly turn up more interesting information, but the president's behavior here is not in dispute. He went to a foreign country, asked them for help with his reelection effort. At the same time, he was personally intervening to deny military aid to that country, creating the impression in that country that they couldn't get their military aid unless they helped him out with his reelection effort. That's the starting point. Now, are they going to investigate to flesh out more than that? Maybe. Do they need to? I don't know. And so the Democrats are now moving forward in a way that we don't quite understand the contours of yet. This historic announcement from Nancy Pelosi today has nevertheless already shaken loose a whole bunch of stuff already. When it was becoming apparent today that she was going to announce that there is now an impeachment proceeding underway into the president announced that he would release the transcript of his July 25th phone call with the Ukrainian president. And that's all fine and good. It should be noted that there's no recording of that call. The supposed transcript of the call is just Trump White House notes on what happened in that call. So I'm not sure anybody has real high hopes for what might be in those notes from the call. And if anything super incriminating did happen in that call, whether the White House would include that in the notes and then release them publicly. Also today, the Intelligence Committee in the House and in the Senate, both of those committees announced today that they'd been in touch with counsel for this unnamed whistleblower who had come forward with this troubling report about the president's behavior. Both committees report that the whistleblower is seeking to make contact with the intelligence committees to presumably convey the substance of his or her complaint, even as the Trump administration has been trying to block that complaint from being handed over to Congress directly. Well, the bipartisan leadership of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate and the Democratic chairman of the Intelligence Committee in the House have both said in writing today that they would like to hear testimony from the whistleblower by the end of this week. By the end of this week, and it is already Tuesday. We then got this release of documents from the whistleblower. It's a letter to the Director of National Intelligence from the whistleblower's lawyer. Quote, "Dear Acting Director McGuire, my firm represents a member of the intelligence community who's reported an urgent concern to the intelligence community's Inspector General. My client submitted a disclosure on August 12th through established procedures promulgated by law. Within the statutorily mandated period, the Inspector General concluded that my client's disclosure was both credible and urgent, as the underlying information disclosed meets the standards set forth under law. In accordance with U.S. whistleblower law, I'm providing you formal notice of our intent to contact the Congressional Intelligence Committees directly. Accordingly, I request direction on doing so in accordance with appropriate security practices. I thank you in advance for your time and attention to this matter, and I look forward to your forthcoming guidance." So that's dated today. A letter from the whistleblower's lawyer to the DNI, to the Director of National Intelligence. The Director of National Intelligence has now written back in a letter that is also dated today. And it starts off by saying that as far as the Office of the Director of National Intelligence is concerned, this whistleblower complaint, quote, does not fall within the statutory definition of an urgent concern, meaning you're not going to be protected by this process. But then it gets really interesting. The DNI's letter says, quote, notwithstanding the inapplicability of the statute, it actually says the inapplicability of the statute, but I think he means statute. Notwithstanding the inapplicability of the statute to the present situation, we understand that your client seeks guidance on how to contact and directly share information with the Congressional Intelligence Committees in a manner consistent with appropriate security practices. Because your client's complaint involves confidential and potentially privileged communications by persons outside the intelligence community, the president, we are consulting with other executive branch stakeholders before transmitting to you the guidance sought. We understand the time-sensitive nature of your request and expect that we will be able to provide actionable guidance soon. In other words, this letter tonight from the Director of National Intelligence, from the General Counsel in his office, says, basically, we're listening to the White House when it comes to the proper handling of this whistleblower complaint about the White House, which is not the way it's supposed to go. You're not supposed to go to the subject of the complaint to ask them for guidance in dealing with the complaint about them. But with the Director of National Intelligence and the Inspector General of the intelligence community both set to testify in open session before the intelligence community on Thursday morning on these matters, and with the Speaker of the House having announced a formal impeachment proceeding against President Trump on this subject today, that has a way of calling on, I mean, I don't feel like I'm qualified to say conscience in this matter. Maybe it calls on people's better angels. Maybe it just calls on people's worries about their own place in history on a day like today. But here is how this letter ends from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Quote, please know that the DNI's highest priority is ensuring that the women and men of the intelligence community have everything they need to carry out their mission in support of our nation's security. This includes supporting the rights of whistleblowers to provide information to Congress. I commend your client's willingness to come forward to the Inspector General, and the Director of National Intelligence is committed to protecting your client from retaliation for that disclosure. I also want to take this opportunity to state that we have every reason to believe that your client, our intelligence community colleague, has acted in good faith and fully complied with the law. Furthermore, we understand that your client has respected the confidential and privileged nature of the information while awaiting the guidance that your letter references. Then it closes, again, we will report back to you soon. It's quite a difference in tone there from what the president has been saying on Twitter and in other venues, questioning the patriotism of this whistleblower and suggesting that this is a person who's just out to hurt the United States and is an enemy of this country. That said, unless the Director of National Intelligence is personally offering to be the bodyguard and defense lawyer for this whistleblower, this sort of personal assurance that I'll make sure you're not retaliated against, even though I'm declaring you to be outside the protection of the whistleblower law here, it may ring a little hollow to the whistleblower, him or herself. But you can see the change in tone there from the Director of National Intelligence. You can see maybe what counts as nervousness there, I don't know. You can see, in any case, that this question is being called. You can see now that this is not just spinning out as some other Trump norm-breaking Trump scandal that never goes anywhere. You can see now that this is the place where at least someone is finally trying to draw a line.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.